All right, so the final set of notes for advanced biology has always been, at least as long as I've taught it, the animal systems, sort of a quick survey of the body systems, and undoubtedly this is definitely a crash course. And the way we've usually done this is I've just basically kind of covered some things about the systems on the whiteboard, and you guys, the students, have decided kind of what you wanted to write down and what you weren't worried about writing down. And I've thought that it's a good practice for what you might see in college, where a lot of times a professor just kind of does a chalk talk, so is what they used to call it, and just talks up there at the board, and you got to kind of follow along. So I like to do this for a class period, basically at the end of what is freshman year for most of you guys. So this year, I don't have slides for you, but I'm just gonna kind of use a whiteboard here on video to run you through this. But as you guys probably know, when we talk about body systems, what we are really talking about is anatomy and physiology. And you probably also already know that, anatomy and physiology is its own course at our school and a lot of schools, which leads you to believe that it is a massive area of study, right? And basically, anatomy is the structures of a body, right? And physiology is the function of those structures. And so this is a really large area of study and a complex area of study. And we're going to try to do this in one little note video. So obviously, this is, like I said, very much a crash course, and I'm just kind of skimming the surface of these things. And I will certainly not be telling you everything you need to know about these systems. But just some of the major highlights that I think are good to know before you move on to the next science. And if you hadn't already figured it out, can you figure out my picture? It's a peanut, because this is the body systems in a nutshell. All right, and the drawings only get better from here. So the first thing that we want to mention quickly is the levels of organization. And this is something that we've been talking about all year long. We've talked about various ways of doing organization, but sort of the classic, biological level of organization. We've got cells as that smallest unit, right? And cells give rise to tissues, which are groups of cells that work together. And then tissues work together to form organs. And then organs work together to form organ systems. And sort of depending on who you talk to, the number can vary slightly. But for our class, I would like to consider 11 systems of the animal body. And essentially, when you're talking about a system, you're talking about a group of organs that work toward a common purpose, or we could say a common function. So we're going to highlight these 11 systems, we're going to look at their major function, and we're going to look at some of their features. All right, so number one, and I'll probably lose track here as we go. But system number one, the skeletal system. Now, the skeletal system, major function, and the way I'm going to abbreviate this is FN. Right? So anytime I write FN, what I mean here is function. Major functions for the skeletal system really are to be a supportive framework. All right, now, secondary function here is movement, right? Also protection. All right, but as you guys know, your skeleton is basically a framework to kind of hang the other parts of your body on. It's a scaffolding, right? But we also need to be able to kind of push or pull against something to be able to move, and that's what your skeleton is. It can sort of be like an anchor, right, for movement, and then also protection. Some of your vital organs, like your brain, your heart, your lungs, are protected by bone, right? And so when we talk about the skeletal system, for us, we're talking about bone. I do want to mention a couple other things, though. There is such a thing as a hydrostatic system, which is really just seen in aquatic organisms. Right? This is where basically you use an enclosed space that's filled with water, right? Which becomes pressurized. And if you think about that for a second, if you think about like a water balloon, right? It becomes tight and somewhat firm when it fills with water. And so some invertebrates, some organisms that don't have a skeleton, a true skeleton, can use what's called a hydrostatic skeleton, which is just water. Other option that's out there is called exoskeleton. You probably heard of this before, right? Arthropods, right? Insects, or you could think of crustaceans in the ocean, right? These have a hard jointed covering, typically made of what's called chitin, right, on the outside. So if you think about that for just a moment, like if you see a lobster, it doesn't have an internal skeleton, it just has that exoskeleton. And what's interesting is if you're going to have an outer suit of armor like that and you want to grow, you have to break out of that suit and build a new one, right? And so we call that molting. Now, what we have is, right, an endoskeleton, right? An internal bony skeleton, right? Let me get rid of that though. So an internal skeleton, and this consists of bones and cartilage. Right, cartilage being a lot more flexible than bone, but this again serves as our framework. An endoskeleton is also jointed, which means bones connect to other bones, and the way you would connect a bone to a bone is called a ligament. So you've probably heard of those before too, especially like in the knee. You're often injured in sports and things like that. Now, sticking with our skeletal system for the moment, the human adult skeleton has how many bones? Anybody? 206. You're actually born with more than that, but then some of those bones, like in the skull and other places, fuse together as you develop. And so we end up with around 206 is the number we usually see. So let's draw a skeleton here real quick. This should be really interesting. So this, right, is called the cranium. And some of you guys might already know these things. And the cranium is forms the skull, right? Also forms the upper jaw, which is technically referred to as the maxilla. And then you have a separate lower jaw, all right, called the mandible, which is the only part of your skull that's not fused to the rest of it, right? And that gives you a lot more motion, allows you to talk and eat and those kind of things. Now, this is going to get ugly because I'm going to be layering right on top of other things. But then you're going to have vertebrae, right? The backbones. So your spinal column is formed of a number of vertebrae. These vertebrae, when they're in your neck, are called cervical. Then you've got thoracic vertebrae, a little lower than that. And then you've got lumbar vertebrae down toward the bottom, and these are the largest vertebrae that kind of hold weight. At the bottom, you have what's called a sacrum, which is a fusion of vertebrae, makes it a little larger. And the sacrum forms sort of the middle part of the pelvis, right, which forms your hips and that kind of stuff. Now let's go back up toward the top here. You've got a shoulder blade on each side, right? Technically, that's called a scapula. And that scapula is connected to what basically will become kind of part of your rib cage. But it's connected here centrally. Like I said, I know it's going to get messy because I'm going to draw over some things here. By your collarbone, right, which is called your clavicle. And then your clavicle in the center connects to what sometimes people call your breastbone, which is called the sternum. Right? And then the sternum in the front and the vertebrae in the back form connections with bones called ribs. But you already knew that, right? Now, then we have, and everything we've talked about so far is oftentimes kind of referred to as part of the axial skeleton, with the exception of the scapula. Now, the scapula is technically part of the appendages, or what we call the appendicular skeleton. So if we talk about the upper appendages, right, the upper part of your arm is called the humerus. Right, it forms the elbow with really two forearm bones. Right, you've got one that kind of runs underneath, forms this real pointy part of your elbow. That's called the ulna. And then you've got one more, what I think of as on the top, called the radius. Then you've got 7 little bones here in your wrist. We're not going to worry about their separate names, but these are called carpals. Then you've got sort of what I think of as 5 hand bones, which are called metacarpals. And then you've got little finger bones coming out from there that are called phalanges. And that forms your arm. Now let's take a look at the leg, and we'll have the skeleton knocked out here, at least the major bones. At the hip, I'm on my back porch, by the way, if you hear dogs barking in the background. Your thigh bone is your longest bone in your body. It's called your femur. But you got this little bone right here on top called the patella, or kneecap. All right, you got your shin bone, one that you can feel. If you feel your shin there, that's called the tibia. And then you've got another skinny bone that kind of runs within your calf muscle called the fibula. And the setup at your foot is really similar. Again, you've got 7 little bones down here. This time they're called tarsals. Then you've got 5, what I think of as foot bones called metatarsals. And then you've got little toe bones, once again called phalanges. So if that's not the creepiest half skeleton you've ever seen, I don't know what is. Now, our second system is the muscular system. And I don't think I have to tell you that this is made up of muscles, right, or muscle tissue. Muscles have one major function, and that is movement. Now, we mentioned that we mentioned that the skeletal system also deals in movement a little bit. When we talk about movement, the force is generated by the muscles, but that force, again, is going to have to be a push or a pull against the bones, and that's where kind of the bones come in. But if you're asked about the function, which system's major function is movement, you definitely want to go with the muscular system. Now, there are 3 types of muscle in the body. We'll start out with the most kind of rare kind. So you got smooth muscle, you got cardiac muscle, and you got skeletal muscle. Smooth muscle really just found along your gut, also around the uterus in females. This is involuntary muscle, right? And this is weak. So this is really small contractions, not something you do on purpose that help move your food along after you eat, that kind of stuff. Cardiac muscle, I bet you know where that is, right? That's what your heart is made out of. This is also involuntary, which is good, right? Can't forget to make your heart beat, right? It just does it on its own. But this is very strong. In fact, your heart hopefully can beat for many, 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 many years without end. And so it's a very strong muscle. And then you have skeletal muscle. And skeletal muscle is attached to bone. All right, this is what you use to move your body. So this is voluntary. right? And this is also a strong type of muscle. Now, the way that we attach a muscle to a bone is by tendons. You've probably heard of those before. Probably most famous tendon is the Achilles tendon, right? The back of your ankle or right above your heel. It's a very large tendon that connects muscle to your heel bone there. And basically what you have is a system of flexors and extensors. So things that flex and things that extend. And these are opposites of each other, right? So when one of these contracts to sort of cause a movement, the other, what we call antagonistic muscle, has to relax. So for instance, if you want to make a big muscle with your arm, with your biceps, right, like you're flexing your muscle, in order to do that, we're going to contract that biceps on one side of your arm, but we're going to have to relax what's called the triceps on the other side of your arm. Now, one of the most fascinating muscles of all, just to give you something interesting to think about, is the diaphragm. Right? The diaphragm that's located just below your lungs helps you breathe. Now, the reason the diaphragm is so fascinating is because it's a type of skeletal muscle, technically, that can be both voluntary and involuntary. So think about that for a second. You don't have to think about breathing, right? That would be miserable if you had to go through your whole day like in, out, right? Like you don't have to think about breathing, but if you want to, you can. You can hold your breath. And so the diaphragm is cool because the diaphragm has both involuntary control and also voluntary control. All right, our third system, go with green here, is the tegumentary system. I'm guessing this is one that many of you don't know what I'm talking about. If we were in class, I'd ask you to guess right now, what do you think the tegumentary system is? And someone would probably get it eventually. But what I'll tell you is that the function of the tegumentary system is protective covering. What this helps you do is avoid abrasion, just kind of like another word for bruise, right? And water loss. So, have you figured out what this is yet? Yeah, the tegumentary system is your skin, right? It's your skin. You've probably heard this before. It's technically the largest organ that you have. The crazy thing is it is only millimeters thick, right? But it can be very tough in places, as you know. It's the thickest at the bottoms of your feet, right? And then you have really thin skin, like in your eyelids, and places like that. But the tegumentary system also includes all of the features that go along with the skin. So this involves, you've got sweat and oil glands that are built into the various layers of your skin. You've also got your hair and your nails, which are primarily just protein that grow, from your skin. And so that's what the tegumentary system encompasses, is your skin and all of these other kind of features that are part of that. All right, our fourth system is the digestive system. Now, I've found in the past that this is a system that people tend to know a little bit more about than other systems. Everybody seems to know what digestion is, but the function of this system is processing food. Right, so this is a series of organs that work to process the foods you eat, help you absorb those nutrients into your body. Now, one thing that's interesting that a lot of times people don't think about is that in most animals, including us, we perform extracellular digestion. Now, I hope that gives you pause for a second there, right? Extracellular digestion, outside, extracellular. If you think about it, your gut tube, otherwise known as your digestive tract, notice my spelling there, it's not a track like you'd run on, it's a tract. But your digestive tract is technically outside your cellular body, right? The foods you eat pass right through the tube and can technically come right back out in your feces. And so it's extracellular. So what happens is you break down or you digest those foods in that extracellular space. And then that's followed by absorption. So followed by absorbing nutrients into your cells and then into your bloodstream from there. So let's take a look at this tract for a second. And again, this is time for Mr. Burton to show off his drawing skills. So here's a dude, we'll call him Larry. Larry, because he's kind of scary. Some hair, business in the front, party in the back, right? And Larry's going to eat something, right? So let's say Larry is going to eat a pepperoni, all right? And that pepperoni is going to go into his mouth. And a lot of times what people don't think about is that this is the first part of your digestive tract. So oftentimes referred to as the oral cavity is the first place that digestion begins, right? This is highly specialized. It involves teeth that are unique to different types of animals, right? Your teeth are different than your dog's teeth and so on and so forth. It involves, your jaw, which is structured differently than other animals based on the things you eat. Also includes things like saliva, right, which begin this digestion process here. Also with what is the strongest muscle in your body, pound for pound, which is your tongue. Now, after that, we've got your throat. All right, now your throat is interesting. We call it the pharynx because it is actually shared between two systems, right? The digestive system, and then as we'll come back to shortly, the respiratory system. But in the pharynx, you want to make sure that you send this food down the correct tube. And the correct tube is a smooth muscular tube known as the esophagus, which just sort of slowly contracts to help move this food, right, this Larry's pepperoni, downward to the next organ, which is your stomach. I'm not real good at drawing the stomach here. But the stomach is going to be kind of a place to temporarily store your food. You probably know it's highly acidic, and it begins the breakdown of those foods that you eat. After the stomach, the food or somewhat digested material will move into your small intestine. All right, now your small intestine has 3 parts to it. And in humans, in all animals, we call this the small intestine because it's a skinnier tube, right? It has a smaller diameter. But in the human, it's actually really long, right? So I'm just going to draw this big tangle. Your small intestine is a pretty massively long tube. It's, I think in humans, it's somewhere on the order of almost 20 feet. I could be totally wrong about that. I'm kind of having a brain fart here. But it's very, very long. In the pigs that we usually dissect, these baby pigs, it's over 6 feet long. So the small intestine is very, very long. And then after that, the food will move into, although it won't really be like food anymore, but it will move into the large intestine. Now the large intestine, also known sometimes as the colon, is much shorter in animals than the small intestine, but it is wider in diameter. So that's why we call it the large intestine. Now, the small intestine, from a moment ago, is responsible for absorbing nutrients. All right, so in this area, we're going to absorb nutrients. The large intestine is going to kind of prepare your feces or your poop, right? So it's going to be responsible for a lot of water absorption, actually, or what is reabsorption of water. The very last part of the colon is referred to as the rectum, right? And then the very end of the tube is referred to as the anus, with an anal opening that allows you to excrete. All right, now, before we move past this, though, too, so this is everything that's part of the tract. you've got a couple other organs that we talk about as accessory organs in the digestive system. One of those is the liver. Right? The liver is sort of your largest internal structure or internal organ. The liver has lots of different jobs, but one of the things that it does is creates bile, which it then stores in a little pouch called your gallbladder. And bile is released from the gallbladder when you eat, and it helps you kind of break down fats or lipids. Another one of the main accessory organs that we see kind of tucked just below the stomach is your pancreas. And your pancreas is responsible for creating a bunch of digestive enzymes that help you break down foods after you eat them. All right, our fifth system, very quickly, is your excretory system. And your excretory system, the function is waste removal, right, or disposal. So waste removal, really bad handwriting there, or disposal. When we talk about the excretory system, we're really kind of looking at two pieces, right? We're talking about excretion of solids, but that's really more the job of your digestive system, right? Typically, when we talk about the excretory system, we are talking about urine, right? And removal in that way. And the reality is that when you break down proteins in your body, you are going to generate nitrogen waste. And nitrogen waste is different than food waste, right? Nitrogen waste is something that we really are going to create in all these cells, but we don't want it to build up in the cells. So you're immediately going to kick that nitrogen waste out into your bloodstream. And then it's going to get filtered out of your bloodstream at your kidneys. So the kidneys filter out these waste. Right? And they filter out these wastes to create urine. And this is done a little bit differently in different organisms, but for us it's the creation of urine, which we then excrete. And so if we were going to draw this very generally in your body, let's draw just a kind of a stick person here. Get the outline shape so you know where we're talking about. You have a kidney on either side, right? Here, and they're kind of tucked right under the back of your rib cage, right toward the bottom. And each of those kidneys has a tube that comes out called a ureter. And that ureter is going to carry urine down to the urinary bladder. And then you've got another tube called the urethra that carries that urine out of the body. All right, system number 6. Whoa, what happened there? System number 6. All right, the respiratory system. Now, let's bring back Scary Larry for a second. All right. Now, we mentioned that Larry has this pharynx right here in his throat, at the back of his oral cavity. But the pharynx actually has kind of two ways out, right? You can go down that esophagus to our digestive system, or you can take a different route. So that different route is going to be your respiratory system. The major function here, right, is what we refer to as gas exchange. In other words, we want to get oxygen in and CO2 out. And this is true for every single one of your cells, but it's true at the systemic level using your lungs, if you are an air-breathing animal like we are. Right now, really, this is all about diffusion, right? Diffusion of oxygen, diffusion of carbon dioxide across those cell membranes in your lungs. right? And this requires a damp surface, which is why your lungs are internal. You got to keep those moist at all times in order for gas exchange to occur across them. Now, the lung is an interesting thing. It's almost like a sponge, right? It's a spongy network of tissue and tiny blood vessels called capillaries. And the main goal here is to have a really high surface area so that these gases can exchange in and out of the bloodstream very easily. Now, let's look back here at Larry's airway for a moment. Just below the pharynx is a tube that has cartilage around it. Right? And so you can feel this in your neck, and what you feel is called your larynx. Males tend to have a more accentuated larynx. It's the Adam's apple, right? But the larynx is where your vocal cords are. It's how you produce sound. Interesting side note, the larger the larynx, the more the sound resonates and the deeper the sound. And so this is why males tend to have deeper voices than females. Not always, but because after puberty, their larynx grows and they get that Adam's apple. But it's also why some of the other creatures make such deep noises. Like lions have really massive larynxes. Whales have really big larynxes. And so the sounds they make are a much deeper sound, right? Now, just beyond the larynx, you have the trachea. And again, our goal for the trachea is for it to stay open at all times. So that's why it has these cartilage rings in it. The trachea then breaks into basically two bronchi, which are smaller tubes. And then those bronchi branch out into a bunch of bronchioles, which do look like kind of branches on a tree. And then from there, you've got all these little airways that end in little sacs called alveoli. And this is where the gas exchange really takes place. And of course, if we sort of encompass this whole thing in some tissue, we have the lungs, right, at that end point of the airway. All right, system number 7, the circulatory system. Now, this is an incredibly complex system, right? The function of which is transport, right? Transport of nutrients, of gases, like that oxygen and CO2 we just mentioned, of wastes. Basically, you need a way to move these things around your body, right? Get that waste material to your kidneys, or get that carbon dioxide back to your lungs, or get the oxygen from your lungs to other tissues, or get those absorbed nutrients from your small intestine to other tissues. And that is your blood vessels, right? So we have what's called a closed circulatory system, which means all your blood should be contained in vessels. It's not just free flowing in your body, it's in a system of vessels. And so you have a massive pump, right, centrally located in your chest called the heart. And the heart is made up of 4 chambers. Now, just for the record, the heart is not shaped like a Valentine heart, okay? But I'm going to draw it that way just to give us our picture here. The top 2 are your atria. So you have a right atrium and a left atrium. This is where the blood comes into the heart, and that's why we call it an atrium. If you think about like our building at Mercy, the atrium is that front kind of open space. So the atria are this top part where the blood comes in, and then the ventricles are the bottom parts, which are the more muscular, stronger kind of pump parts, and they're going to push the blood out of the heart. Now, we're not going to get into too much about this for this year, but your heart is separated into 2 sides. Now, this is going to feel like opposites, but in medicine and in anatomy, you always think of it like you're looking at a person. So if we were looking face to face at a person, this would be like the right side of their chest over here, and this would be the left. So the right heart and the left heart should be totally separate. So once you're born, the right side of your heart and the left side of your heart, while still attached to each other, should be separate passageways. Right? And the right side is going to actually send blood to your lungs, while the left side is going to send blood kind of out to your other body tissues. Now, you've got your heart, that's a pump, right? And it's going to pump into, what we call a double loop in mammals, because it has these two sides. So going out to the body, we're going to call it a systemic circulation. It goes out to your other systems, right? In the lungs, we're going to call it the pulmonary circulation. Pulmonary means involving the lungs. All right. Now, the other thing is you've got blood vessels. Now, blood vessels is the technical kind of general term. There are two types of vessels, right? You've got arteries and you've got veins. Arteries, this is easy to remember. Arteries with an A, they carry blood away from the heart. So no matter where it's going, if blood is leaving the heart, it's going to go away from the heart in arteries. And then veins return blood to the heart. And so your arteries are a lot more pressurized. It's a good thing that they're also usually deeper in your body. So any of the vessels you might see on your arm or things like that, those are veins that are superficial right under the skin. And then obviously the one other thing about your circulatory system that's important is your blood. And your blood is a tissue made up of different types of cells, right? You got red blood cells, you got white blood cells, you've got other things in there called platelets. And just so you guys know, try to dispel kind of an old wives' tale, your blood is always red, okay? It is red because of the iron that's found in hemoglobin, which is a protein that's in your blood. For some reason, people tend to think, whether it's because of the way it's drawn in books or whatever, that sometimes they say, well, the blood inside of me is blue, right? Maybe you used to think this, or you still think this, my blood is blue until it hits the air and it turns red. And sadly, you might have been taught that by an old teacher or something. But that's totally not true, right? Your blood is always red. It doesn't change color. And if your vessels look kind of blue to you in your arm, it's actually just sort of an optical illusion. Seeing the tissue kind of through your skin makes it look a little bit bluish, but I promise it's not. It's red. All right, our eighth system, also very complicated system, is the nervous system. In fact, when I was in medical school, the nervous system was its own course. So you took regular anatomy and physiology, and then you took neuroanatomy and learned the nervous system separately because it's so complex. But the function of the nervous system is information processing and communication within the body. And a lot of times, the way that we say this is, responses to stimuli. So there are some fun little mini activities we could do in the classroom if we were together, in terms of kind of seeing how your nervous system works in terms of reflexes and all that kind of stuff. But basically what happens in your nervous system, right, is you sense something, you integrate that information, meaning you kind of make sense of it, and then you respond. Right, so like I'm so likely to do, let's say I throw something at one of you guys, right? What's going to happen is you're going to sense that, right? Hopefully with vision, you're going to see that ball coming at you. You're going to integrate that. So your brain's going to say, wow, there is an object flying at my face. and you're going to respond. And that response might be that you duck, that response might be that you just crinkle up your face, that response might be that you close your eyes. But all of that is possible because of your nervous system, right? It brings in the information, it makes sense of it, and then it sends out new instructions to have you respond to that. The nervous system is made up of really specialized cells called neurons, right? And these are cells that transmit an electrical signal. Now, if you want to learn more about that, you can take anatomy or you can take AP biology. It's a very complicated process, but that's how your nerves actually work. It's not like you're going around electrocuting people with this electricity, but it's these tiny millivolts of electricity that allow you to actually send signals through those cells. Briefly, the nervous system has really two parts. It's got what's called the central nervous system, and the central nervous system is your brain and spinal cord. All right, so you got your brain, and then your spinal cord runs down your back, and then you've got all these nerves that come out from the spinal cord, right? Whether those are really going, sending info out or bringing info in, but that's referred to as your peripheral nervous system. So you've got a CNS and a PNS, the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. All right, our ninth system, we're getting down there, is your endocrine system. Now, this is one that oftentimes people have heard of, but they really couldn't say what it does, right? And the function of this system, and there's a reason I do it right after the nervous system, is also cell communication. But this isn't electrical communication like we saw with the nervous system. This is responding to stimuli with chemical signals. So your endocrine system is made up of a bunch of different glands, and glands are organs that produce hormones. There's a bunch of different places in your body, right? The pituitary, the hypothalamus, the thyroid gland, your ovaries, testes. There's a whole bunch of different glands, and these all produce hormones. And so I'll give you a quick example. You have adrenal glands. Adrenal, they sit right above the kidneys. That's what this means, right on the kidney. And the adrenal gland produces a couple different things, but they produce a hormone called epinephrine, also known as adrenaline. So some of you guys maybe have heard of fight or flight response before, right? Technically, we call it the stress response. But basically, if you're in a situation where your body perceives stress, maybe you're in a dark alley and there's a creepy guy walking towards you, or maybe you just found out you have a pop quiz, your body will release epinephrine and it will respond in a bunch of different ways, right? Your heart rate will quicken, your breathing will quicken, you'll actually kind of divert blood more to your muscles instead of your digestive system, because you might need to run or fight versus need digest the Pop-Tart you just ate. Your eyes will actually widen, your sense of vision and hearing will increase a little bit, and this is all that stress response, and a lot of that is this epinephrine hormone. All right, system number 10, our second to last system, I know we've been talking for a long time here, is your immune system. Now, the immune system is quite the topic right now with COVID-19 pandemic and all this stuff. But the immune system's function, right, is protection from infection. Right, so this is defense against pathogens or infectious diseases. The primary kind of player in your immune system are your white blood cells, called leukocytes, right? And you also make some, we'll call them associated proteins that are part of your immune system as well. This, again, is a really complex system. It's a fun one to talk about, but I don't want to belabor the point here. We can kind of say that you have two branches, though, of this system. The first branch is called your innate immunity. Innate is a word, right, that pretty much means born in or born with. So some of your immune system function you are born with. You have some defensive cells. Your skin is considered part of your innate immunity. We have the inflammatory response. So inflammation is part of the innate immunity. And then the other branch is called adaptive immunity. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It adapts over time, right? So this builds up over time. This is why, theoretically speaking, my immune system is a little bit stronger than your all's. It's because I've been around longer, right? I've experienced more pathogens in my life. And so my immune system, again, theoretically, should be stronger. This is also why younger kids are more prone to sickness at school than older kids, because their adaptive immunity isn't as strong. But then eventually you also hit sort of a turning point as you age where it starts to break down a little bit. And so that's also why someone my age, in my 30s, theoretically should have a stronger immune system than someone my parents' age in their 60s. All right, and our 11th and final system for our course, and the last new topic of advanced biology, is your reproductive system. Now, reproductive system is not really a chief topic for biology class, at least the way I teach it. The function of the reproductive system is to generate cells for reproduction. All right, now you guys will cover this a little bit more in your health classes here at school. But we have, as we've talked about all year, as mammals, we reproduce sexually, right? And so in females, we have ovaries. In males, we have testes. And again, these contain the cells that we need to generate cells for reproduction, right? This is where meiosis takes place. So females can generate eggs, males can generate sperm. We then have internal fertilization, right? Which leads to a new cell called a zygote. And so it is these reproductive tissues that can create these cells and allow this to happen. Again, it's not a sex ed class for me, at least, so we'll leave that up to your health classes to cover that a little bit more in terms of how this process works. So that takes care of the 11 systems that we see in the human body. And again, if this intrigues you, then definitely think about taking anatomy or biomedical science or AP biology at school, where we get into these things with a lot more depth. Otherwise, you are set, and that takes care of notes for advanced biology at Mercy Academy. Thanks for listening.